Points on any topic.
Do you know who I am? I don't know how to put this, but I'm kind of a big deal. People know me.
I'm very happy for you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is not Jay Thomas. This is Rob Port sitting in for Jay Thomas. I apologize for all of you out there who are disappointed at that news. But we're going to make it through your Monday afternoon, and I'll try to make it interesting. I posted on Twitter just before I came on that I was guest hosting for Jay. Which, by the way, Ronnie, I didn't. I forgot that I was doing this. I'm ashamed to say. I was carrying on with my Sunday, and then had kind of a late night, and I was going to bed, and I use a Google Home for my alarm clock, right? And I have this routine where I tell my Google Home good night, and it asks me what time I want the alarm set for, and it reads me my calendar appointments for the next day and all that stuff. And it goes, you had guest hosting for Jay Thomas at 2:00, and I was like, well, crap, I don't have anything prepared. So, but I think I put together a pretty good show. First things first, get out of the way for the Vikings game, and I was just talking to Mike Capel before the show. He had to fill me in on all this because they're going to have the guy who doesn't ever watch any football announce the Viking score. But I had to get the down. Like, well, who do they play? What was the score? I don't even know. The Colts won, Mike. Was that right? Colts won 28-11.
Those guys stepped out of the studio, but you've got me in
Ronnie,
studio,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yep. And I can tell you, unfortunately, yes. If most of us, like regular Vikings fans, were watching the game yesterday, it was pretty much like they never showed up. So
Yikes.
Who knows if they were actually in the stadium. But, yeah, it was I don't recall seeing a Viking performance that bad since the Bills dismantling. I want to say it was either last year or the year before where we started out 2-0.
I mean, it's the Vikings. Let's not make it something. This is a rare occurrence. From what I understand of football, you don't have to reach back that far into Vikings lore to find some drubbing that is worth comparing it to. I say that I don't even watch football. I'm aware of this. Anyway, Ty W had the winning score. He guessed 28-12. Mm-hmm. The actual score was 28-11, so he almost got it spot on. So Ty W, give us a call for your $50 Club West gift card, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. That's Ty W. You guessed 28-12. You almost got it dead on. Give us a call, and we'll get your gift card. How long does he have to call again? I should know. I listen to this every Monday when I'm on with Jay, and I should have this down. How long does he have to call in, Ronnie?
I think just a few minutes, but we may actually have him on very shortly here. But
okay.
Nonetheless, the other cool thing is not only do you get the weekly certificate if you do happen to be the winner for Pub West, but weekly winners are put into a drawing for a year-end $200 gift certificate to Pub West.
So. Wonderful. Well, that's a good deal. Ty W, call in. You guessed 28-12, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. All right, so coming up on the show today, I have been working on getting a debate. Now, I hosted a debate on my podcast, Plain Talk Podcast, earlier this year in the U.S. House race between Kelly Armstrong and Democrat. He's the incumbent, obviously, and Zach Rackner, the Democratic challenger. The debate went very well. I was trying to set one up for the gubernatorial candidates. Doug Burgum, the incumbent, obviously, and his challenger, Democrat Shelley Lenz, worked for weeks on it, going back and forth with the Burgum team and the Lenz team. Shelley Lenz, she was all in on it from day one, but Doug Burgum not wanting to do it. So today, coming up at in the 3 o'clock hour, for most of the 3 o'clock hour till about 3:45, Democratic gubernatorial candidate Shelley Lenz is going to be on the show. I'm going to be talking with her. I'm going to be taking, asking questions. But, more importantly, if you got questions for her, we love to hear them. You can call in. You can ask her whatever you want. Topics not limited. Some of the things I'm going to be asking her about are, she just recently released a coronavirus plan. I was a little bit critical of that, so I'm sure her and I will go back and forth on that a little bit. I'd like to talk about, some of the other issues facing our state. We have fiscal matters ahead of us. that are kind of interesting, all sorts of things. So that's coming up in the 3 o'clock hour. You're going to want to stay tuned for that. And then also coming up in the 4 o'clock hour, I'm going to have State Representative Scott Louser. Now, he is a Republican. He is from the Minot area. He was one of the sponsors of the legislation in Bismarck that went on to become Measure 2 that's on the statewide ballot. And Measure 2 is getting a lot of debate right now. A lot of it having to do with the fact that Measure 3 was booted off the ballot. There has been, in recent election cycles, a move towards, very deep-pocketed special interest groups, often just flat-out billionaires, buying their way onto the statewide ballot. In fact, I wrote a column last week where I tallied up, and one company, Ronnie, if you can imagine this, one company had billed, since the 2016 election cycle. So you're talking about, essentially 3 election cycles, 2016, 2018, 3, counting the present one, over $1.3 million just to collect signatures for ballot measures. $1.3 million. Can you believe that?
That's a lot of money.
And the thing that bothers me about that is when people talk about the initiated measure process, they're always talking, it's the voice of the people. And these dastardly villains in the legislature are out to silence the people. Of course, an argument which forgets the fact that the legislature is also elected by the people, and the legislature must be doing something right because most of them get elected every 4 years. So I think the cranks who are constantly complaining about the legislature and the legislature's terrible and all these other things do not represent the majority of what North Dakotans want. Now, is the legislature going to be able to convince voters to do what Measure 2 does, which is essentially if a constitutional amendment, now this doesn't apply to all ballot measures, only measures that would amend the Constitution. If they pass, they would have to be approved by the legislature as well before being enacted. If the legislature says yes, the amendment gets enacted and it's the law. If the legislature says no, then the voters get another chance at it. And if they pass it again, then it's enacted. So it prolongs the process a little bit. It gives us a little bit more time to scrutinize amendments that are made to the most important legal document in our state, the state constitution, which I think is a good thing. It should be hard to amend the Constitution. And for those of you who are saying, well, it's already harder to amend the Constitution, you have to get twice as many signatures as you do for a statutory measure, and that's true. You have to get, what is it? I think it's like 27,000 signatures, 28,000 signatures now, something in that ballpark. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. That's certainly true. But when you're a billionaire and you can, throw $350,000 at a company to go out and collect the signatures for you, which is what the Measure 3 folks did this cycle. And that's the company. I think their name is Advanced Micro-Targeting. They've received $1.3 million from various groups to do this since 2016. If you can do that, then collecting twice the number of signatures is not really an obstacle at all. And this is the problem, is we talk about the initiated measure process as though it was just citizen activists out there and they're volunteering their time and doing the work that the legislature won't. And that's just not true. A lot of times these ideas don't even start with citizens. They start with these activist groups, and a lot of them are just looking for an easy place to pass their hobby horse issues so that they can go to other states and say, see, North Dakota made it as law. You should too. And North Dakota has a very open process. In a perfect world, that would be great. But our open process leaves us open to abuse. I think the process has been abused in recent years, and I think Measure 2 would be a good, the way I've been describing it to people is a check and a balance. Right? That sort of thing is very fundamental to the American system of government. Checks and balances. The legislature can't unilaterally enact law. The governor gets a chance to weigh in on it. The governor can veto it, and then the legislature can override the veto, and then the courts have a review process. There's checks and balances all over the system. Why not for the initiated measure process too? Why can't there be checks and balances in this process too? I don't think that's an affront to the will of the people because, again, remember, the people elect the legislature too. And if the legislature gets in the habit of overturning ballot measures that the people want, then you could vote those fools out as well if you want. But I'm in favor of checks and balances, and I'm in favor of it being hard. I think it should be hard. I think it should be an arduous process to change the law, and it should be difficult to change the law, to change the Constitution, in particular, the state constitution and the national constitution, by the way. But anyway, we'll be talking with Scott Louser about that coming up at 4 o'clock. Plus your phone calls, of course, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329, email talk@wday.com. So let's take a little break here, and then we'll come back with your phone calls, your discussion, and I want to talk a little bit about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's what everybody's talking about in the nation. I have some thoughts about, well, I guess the big question in front of us, is it appropriate this close to a national election for Republicans to push ahead with nominating a replacement? Love to hear what you think. Once again, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back, Jay Thomas Show with Rob Porch sitting in. If you don't know who I am a columnist for Forum Communications. I write for the newspaper, the Fargo Forum, the Grand Forks Herald, the Jamestown Sun. They appear in pretty much, I don't want to say all of the FCC Forum Communications publications, but the North Dakota ones anyway. Also started sayanythingblog.com if you want to visit there, and always a rollicking political discussion going on there. All right, so Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as if 2020 couldn't be any more of a fraught year. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, which, first of all, let's acknowledge the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a human being who is not with us anymore. She battled heroically against cancer for, I think decades in total, various forms of it. So terrible loss, as you know, on the human level. I wish Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still with us as a human being, but she's not, and that's a tragedy. So that's a terrible thing. There's no avoiding the politics of this thing, though. She held a position that is hugely consequential in our American system of government. And maybe that's something else we should acknowledge before we discuss this too thoroughly, is the fact that if one octogenarian who is battling cancer, passing away, throws our republic into the amount of turmoil that we're about to go through, and folks, you haven't seen the half of it yet. I suspect that the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, as ugly and terrible as those were just a prelude to what we're about to go through. If that can happen, and you know, our political system has problems, and by the way, if the way we're governed hinges on, you know, one person dying, well, gosh, our judicial system is pretty darn flawed as well. I think we maybe should spend some time thinking about how important, I mean, the reason why these Supreme Court positions, these judicial appointments have become such a murder, you know, figuratively speaking, such a murderous, cutthroat business, is because they've become so consequential. And it just shouldn't be that way. You know, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Congress isn't really legislating anymore. That has allowed presidents to try to get away with all sorts of executive orders. The lawsuits are endless. And, I mean, entire industries are kind of left dangling on what some unelected person in a black robe is going to decide. I mean, look at the energy industry. We know all about that here in North Dakota, where, you know, the future of the Dakota Access Pipeline hangs in judicial balance. So, you know, we really need to think about, you know, getting back to the original process where, you know, Congress makes laws, and we're just not doing that anymore, which is why the Supreme Court has become such an important place. And by the way, the courts seem to make more laws sometimes, it could seem, at least more consequential law than the legislatures do, and that's a problem in and of itself. But right before us is the question of, should President Trump, and he's going to, so I mean, it's kind of a moot discussion, but a lot of people out there are saying, well, it's inappropriate for President Trump, you know, to make an appointment, and for Senate Republicans to try to confirm that appointment before the election. And even before, I mean, because really, they could do this in the lame duck session of Congress, too. If Republicans lose the Senate, the current incumbents will still hold office until the end of the year, until early January. So they could do it during the lame duck after the election as well. But I think most people want to vote before the election because Republicans are scared of more defections, essentially. But that's the push. And I guess the thing is now, is that appropriate? And I'd love to hear what you think. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. Do you think it's appropriate? Should President Trump appoint a replacement? Now, if we're gonna discuss this, I think first of all, if nobody discusses this, I think we should point out first of all what the Constitution says. Now, this entire process is governed by Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, which reads in part, he, referring to the president, shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of senators present concur, and he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States. That's all the Supreme Court has to say about it. Or excuse me, that's all the U.S. Constitution has to say about it. Maybe the Supreme Court has more to say about it. I don't know. That's it. That's all the Constitution says. Not covered in the Constitution is what happens if a vacancy occurs really, really close to Election Day. Not covered in the Constitution is anything about whether the Senate has to hold hearings on the nominee, right? Because that's another question. Should the Senate hold hearings? Well, the Constitution doesn't say the Senate has to. It just says the Senate has to confirm. The majority controls the Senate right now. That's the Republicans. And any way they want to go about doing it, I guess, is fine. That's up to the Senate. It also doesn't say anything about whether or not the Senate even has to vote on a nominee. Now, remember, that's something that happened with Merrick Garland, President Barack Obama's last nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, Mr. Garland ultimately was never seated because Republicans refused to vote on it. But, a refusal to vote is a de facto rejection. The Constitution doesn't say the Senate has to vote. It also doesn't say anything about whether the Senate can vote on this in a lame duck session. The Senate certainly can do that if they want to. So what you're probably hearing out there is a lot of hoorah about, it's unconstitutional and Republicans, shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that, and there's all these different rules. The only law that matters in this matter is the United States Constitution. And the only part of the Constitution that applies to this is Article 2, Section 2. And Article 2, Section 2 is silent on all of those things I just mentioned. So Republicans can do exactly what they're saying that they're going to do, and it's perfectly legal. President Trump can make a nomination, and the Senate can confirm him, and that's that. Now, in years past, there was a thing such as a filibuster for judicial nominees. Typically, this wasn't used. I mean, if you look throughout the history of judicial nominations, most of them were unanimous or nearly unanimous. Just about everybody, bipartisan majorities, voting in favor of these nominees. It really wasn't until the George W. Bush administration and Democrats started holding up judicial appointments that this became such a rancorous affair as it is today. And now it's very, very partisan and very politicized.
Darren from Oaks on line 1.
And that's unfortunate. But Republicans can absolutely do what they're setting out to do. So the question then becomes, should they? They can do it legally. Should they? And maybe Darren, who's calling in from Oaks, has an answer to that. Darren, welcome to the program. Your thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Are you there?
I am here. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I don't have an answer, but that's not unusual. And appropriate, I don't know if appropriate, I don't know that either, but I have a question. Can we, as a nation, with this election more than likely going to be so close, can we afford to have a tie on the Supreme Court if something goes there?
Run that by me again. I'm not sure I'm following your scenario.
Okay. With the election being so close, or it's probably going to be close,
right.
Some question may end up in the Supreme Court, and if you've only got 8 justices, can we afford a tie? Where does it go if it's a tie?
if it's a tie, there's essentially no decision. And so because before it would get to the United States Supreme Court, there would be a lowercase ruling, and so essentially the lower court ruling would apply. Now,
would be upheld.
so I don't know. I mean, that would be interesting. I don't know what grounds anybody would have. It's really early on to even know what sort of grounds anybody would have to sue to try to claim that a process that Republicans might implement would be illegal. I mean, especially when we look at the history, the only other thing Democrats could claim is that, the minorities not being given a right to, hold hearings or to weigh in or whatever. But remember, Democrats, when they held the majority in the Senate under President Obama, they're the ones who started getting rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees. If Harry Reid hadn't acted back in, 2013, the filibuster might very well still be in place today. And Democrats could use it to hold up this process until after the election. Now, they're the ones who started getting rid of it. They got rid of it for lower court judicial appointees, and then Republicans reciprocated getting rid of it for Supreme Court nominees. And here we are today. I would rather the filibuster still be in place. I like the filibuster. The filibuster requires some level of bipartisan buy-in before something like an appointment happens or something like legislation happens. I liked the filibuster. I liked that we had a rule that forced the two sides. Sometimes you have to get some buy-in from the other side. I didn't think that was such a bad thing, but hey, Democrats started us down that road. It'd be a little hypocritical of them now. And by the way, I like that people are calling each other hypocrites in politics. Can we admit that American politics has become a spectacle where it's just a bunch of hypocrites accusing one another of hypocrisy? That's all it is now.
Exactly.
They're all hypocrites, one way or the other. Thank you very much for the call, Darren. I appreciate it. Want to take a break? Would love to hear what you think. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. We're going to go to a break, and we'll be right back after this. Thanks.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go?
Welcome back. Rob Port in for Jay Thomas, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. We are talking about the political brouhaha emerging over the appointment or the appointment of a replacement for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If you want to call in and weigh in on that, should Republicans and should President Trump, they're going to, and they can, per the law. What they're doing is legal. People out there may be willing to tell you that it's not legal, but go read Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution for yourself. They have these powers, and nothing says that Republicans can't do this if it is politically inconvenient for Democrats for them to do so. Nothing in the Constitution says they can't do it if it's really, really close to a national election. Like it or not, President Trump is the duly elected president right now. A Republican majority controls the Senate. They control this process. And don't talk to me about the filibuster when it comes to judicial appointments. Democrats started us down that road under Harry Reid in 2013. That's why we don't have a filibuster today. During the break, Tim wrote in, he says, if they get a new justice in and Dems win the Senate and the White House, some think the Dems will try and increase the number of justices to water down the Republican appointments, something for people to chew on. That's right. It's called the court packing plan. And they've been talking about this actually for a while, even before Justice Ginsburg passed away. Even going back into like August and prior to that, Democrats have been talking about doing this in retaliation. In fact, even going back so far as some of the rulings that the current court has handed down that the Democrats didn't like so much, they've been talking about this court packing plan. Now, when people talk about court packing, that really originated with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They called it the court packing plan. The name of the legislation was the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill. And what had happened is back then, FDR obviously got, if you know your history, he got elected campaigning on the New Deal. But when he put a bunch of the New Deal policies into place, the Supreme Court struck a lot of the provisions down. There was a bunch of them, like 6 or 7. I'm forgetting how many actually. And so FDR came up with this plan, and he pitched it to the American public, and it was essentially that he would add more seats on the Supreme Court, and then, of course, because he was president, he would get to appoint the people who would hold those seats. And so essentially he would get to pick his people, and he would water down the votes against his New Deal policies on the court by appointing more people to the court. He was ultimately not successful in this, but it never really came for a vote in the Senate. It got locked up in a Senate committee, and then there was a death. I want to say it was the majority leader. I think the majority leader of the Senate at the time died. And he was a big proponent of the bill, and ultimately, once he died, the bill just kind of died in Congress, and it never went anywhere. But that's the court packing plan. So essentially, that's what, when Democrats are talking about court packing, that's what they're saying to do. Oh my goodness, got a little sideways in my throat there. Too much campfire over the weekend in the backyard, Ronnie. So essentially, when the Democrats say that they're going to pack the court, or there's going to be a court packing or whatever, what they're saying is they would use the power of the United States Senate to enlarge the size of the court, use the power of Congress they pass legislation essentially to enlarge the size of the court, and then the president, who they're assuming under this scenario would probably be Joe Biden, would appoint new people, and then that would then outnumber the number of justices. Now, I got to say that politically, this did not work out so well for FDR. Now, he was a very popular president overall, but this was sort of the high watermark of his political influence. He tried this, and he failed. It backfired on him. And I think Democrats would be very, very unwise to try it now. Now, as for my thoughts of the current situation, should Republicans appoint a nominee, again, stipulating to the fact that they absolutely can, what frightens me a little bit is how scary politics in America has gotten right now. It is at such a fevered pitch. People are... Well, look at all the violence we saw during the Black Lives Matter protests. Look at the violence we saw during the Dakota Access Pipeline protests here in North Dakota. Look at the violence we saw during the protests against President Trump's inauguration. I worry about continuing to escalate this partisan rancor, because it's been going tit for tat. I've mentioned this already. We used to have a filibuster for judicial appointees. That was a thing in the United States Senate. We had a filibuster. If you wanted to make a judicial appointment, it had to pass the filibuster. And Democrats got rid of that. And we've been going tit for tat, back and forth, even going all the way back to Robert Bork under the Reagan administration. Bork was dragged through the mud. If you're familiar with politics, this is maybe a little bit down in the weeds, but they call it Borking. What was done to Clarence Thomas, what was done to Brett Kavanaugh. Part of me thinks that at some point, somebody has to be the one to say, you know what, we're not going to escalate this any further.
Absolutely, Rob. And you've got people out there like Risla Aslan, who's tweeting, we're going to burn this thing to the ground. We have to consider all nuclear options. You've got AOC opening her mouth because she's a young progressive senator, and apparently that's the way they play these days. There's no commenting about that. We did have a caller who didn't wish to go on the air, but I think she was reiterating your point that this has actually occurred 29 times in history, 19 from the same party where there was a justice needing to be nominated, 10 not, 17 of those times there was confirmation, and that's just,
but you've also got to remember
fact.
that was back in the day when these judicial appointees weren't controversial.
Right.
I mean, they were getting like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think had 3 votes against her. I think her confirmation vote in the United States Senate was 97-3. Ginsburg,
absolutely,
who was, and again, as a human being, I never wished her anything but good health and everything else. But as a jurist, was an ideologue. I mean, there's just no question about it. She was an ideologue, and yet even her controversial appointment to the United States Supreme Court, when it occurred, was approved 97-3 by the United States Senate. So this didn't used to be so as controversial as it is. We are in brave new territory, which is why, I'm making this argument now. I mean, at what point do we stop escalating? But I also don't want to reward the people like what you're talking about, Ronnie, who are out there saying, well, we're going to burn things to the ground if we don't get our way. Do we acquiesce to that? Do we reward to that sort of behavior by saying, well, okay, well, then we won't exercise our legal authority to do this thing that would be very advantageous for us and would protect our agenda and our platform of ideas. We're gonna refrain from doing that because you're threatening to burn things down. That's a tough thing. But I just, at some point, the escalation has to stop. At some point, we have to sit down and say, you know what? The other side won elections, and they get to govern. And in this instance, it's a little hard to say because the Republicans are the ones who won the election. They won the White House. They won the Senate. They control this process right now. So it's a tough thing. I realize how Pollyannish it probably sounds of me to sit here and say, well, Republicans can, and it's legal, but maybe they shouldn't for the sake of cooling some of these partisan fires and just let whoever wins the election. And by the way, I think that's a great talking point for President Trump going down the road. You want to motivate Republican voters, say, hey, if you don't elect me, then Joe Biden is going to replace Ginsburg's replacement, and not me, Donald Trump. And by the way, that's the one thing President Trump has done that appeals to all Republicans, right? Even those Republicans who are pretty skeptical of him have generally liked his judicial appointments. So I don't know. I think Republicans ought to wait. And I'm saying that from the perspective, speaking against my own interests as a conservative, we got to cool things down.
Mike from Detroit Lakes.
Mike from Detroit Lakes, you're on. What's up?
Hi. I look at how the Democrats are threatening to stack the Supreme Court, and that's what Franklin Delano Roosevelt had talked about, and his own party shot him down. But all there is in the Congress now are very radical Democrats, and they do not. The reason that they're upset is that they controlled with liberals for 50 years, and now when the shoes switching to the other foot, they don't want to accept that, and they're going to do whatever they can to destroy the Constitution. And I'll tell you what, I've lost all respect for the news media and the entire Democratic Party. They are a bunch of communists.
Well, listen, I don't know that the Democrats are out to destroy. I think they've just reached a point where, and thanks for the call, Mike, I have to go to a break here. I think the Democrats have reached a point where so much of their policy agenda just hinges on getting the right courts to rubber stamp it, that this has become a hugely important thing. And part of this is the judicial branch exceeding their bounds, where they're out creating new law where none existed before to reach an outcome that they wanted. Roe v. Wade is a good example of it. I know a lot of people out there that's a very controversial issue. There's no question the Constitution doesn't weigh in on abortion, but the Supreme Court found one anyway and created new law and created a situation where now suddenly these supposedly impartial jurists are now partisan, are now ideologues, and we are where we're at today. Let's take that break. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. We'll be back right after this. Don't go away. Welcome back. Rob Port in for Jay Thomas, wrapping up the first hour. Coming up in the next hour, you're going to want to get ready. One of the two people who are running for governor of North Dakota this year is going to be on the program, Shelley Lenz. She is the Democratic candidate for governor. She's going to be on starting at 3 o'clock. She'll be taking your phone calls. So if you want to call in with your questions, comments, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. You can email them as well to talk@wday.com. Now, Ronnie, I wanted this to be a debate. I had done a U.S. House debate on my podcast earlier this year between incumbent Kelly Armstrong and Democratic challenger Zach Rachnerud, and went off well, went great. I wanted to do the same thing in the governor's race. Shelley Lenz agreed, and Doug Burgum said no. So I wanted this to be a conversation where Governor Burgum was there as well, and the two candidates could engage and and contrast. Now, I do think they have a debate coming up on Prairie Public, but why just one? Why not do more? That's what I don't understand, and I've been consistent about that. Republican candidates, Democratic candidates, I think they ought to engage. I think they ought to make themselves available for the public to reach out to them, for the public to speak to them, for the public to ask them questions, and also when they're running for office, for their opponents to ask them questions and engage and debate. I mean, that's our whole system of government is built on debate. So I was disappointed that Governor Burgum didn't want to join the show. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean I want Shelley Lenz to be on with to be governor, but I do give her credit for coming on and talking. She's coming up next. I'm Rob Port, sitting in for Jay Thomas on the Jay Thomas Show. We'll be back right after this. Thanks for listening. Welcome back, Rob Port, Jay Thomas Show. Happy to be with you. Happy to be guest hosting this show. I hope it's going well for you. I'm no Jay Thomas, but I try, and I'm always happy when Jay asks me to sit in for him. It's a lot. Or in this instance, Mike Capel asked me because Jay doesn't like to bother himself with the low level mechanics of running his show. He's the talent, right, Ronnie? I'm sure that's what he walks around the WD. I'm the talent.
Well, that's all right because I'm no Kyle Iverson either.
Yeah.
So, Kyle, talent, been with us for many, many, many years.
I'll miss
has
Kyle.
Decided to pursue an outside radio opportunity, and I'm sure he would say the same thing. We so much want to thank all the listeners that both called and emailed the kind comments that you left Kyle and the well wishes. That was greatly appreciated.
Yeah, Kyle, just a great person, great radio person. I'll miss Kyle. Kyle's a great guy. And I guess today it's what we're trying to tell people, Ronnie, is you've got the B squad, but we're going to do our best. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329, email talk@wday.com. My guest now is Shelley Lenz. She's a Democrat. She's from Western North Dakota, Dickinson, Killdeer area, and she's running for governor. Now, as I said in the last hour and at the beginning of the show, I wanted this to be a debate, and I was working on it for my podcast, the Plain Talk podcast. But I wanted it to be a discussion like I had in the U.S. House race earlier this year between Congressman Kelly Armstrong and his challenger, Democrat Zach Racknerud. I wanted it to be a debate, a discussion between the candidates so that they could answer questions and contrast themselves with one another. But Governor Burgum opted not to participate. So can't do anything about that, but Shelley Lenz decided to come on the program. Shelley, how are you?
I'm doing very, very well, Rob. I'm always happy to visit with you. But I do have to remind you, I'm an independent endorsed by the Democratic Nonpartisan League. Great-granddaughter of the original Nonpartisan Leaguers.
That's interesting.
That's a big part of my platform.
That's the first. I think that's the first time I've heard you put it that way. Maybe you've communicated that, and I just haven't picked up on it before. But that's really, I guess that's a surprise.
That's
to
okay.
Me. What about, because I hear that and I want to snort. Like, I hear that and I just, like, if you want to be an independent, run as an independent. You collect 300 signatures, you're on the ballot. Why, if you don't want to be a Democrat, why run for their nomination?
Well, I've always been an independent, and, as you know, I voted for Doug Burgum in 2016, right? So that shows that I'm not, ideological or ideologue or however you say it. And I deeply believe in the nonpartisan league philosophy, which started in the Republican Party back in 1917, and they firmly believed in a two-party system. And that's why when they left the Republican Party, they aligned with the Democrat Party instead of becoming a separate party. So, and it makes it a unique North Dakota political party. So I think that's what rural states need. Yeah.
I mean, because it's an issue, and by the way, if people want to start getting in your questions for Shelley, that's what this segment is about. I'm going to ask her some questions. Her and I are going to discuss. But I'd really like to hear from the audience. If you've got questions from Shelley, for Shelley, I'd like to hear them. She'd certainly like to hear them. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. Go ahead and get those in right now. Now, Shelley, I guess because I think so much of the Democratic Party's, the Democratic-NPL's problems in North Dakota is that people associate them with the National Democratic Party. Now, I do agree that you strike a different tone, and I don't. The people are probably going to see this as snide when I say this, but unlike a lot of your fellow Democratic NPLers, I get the sense that you actually like North Dakota and that you're actually proud to be from here. And I like that about you. I think that's a very different tone. I'm just struggling with the idea that you're not a Democrat when you campaigned for and received the Democratic nomination. That seems like a dodge to me.
Oh, well, it's an endorsement. And it's, again, the Nonpartisan League general philosophy deeply, deeply believes in a two-party system.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a unique political party, and I agree with you 100%. I think both parties should not be wrapping themselves around the national parties. North Dakota has unique challenges, and so I think it's really, really important to not wrap yourself around the national party.
So just tell me why strike that tone? Why do you want to make yourself independent from the National Democratic Party?
Well, one, because I am an independent,
okay.
And two, I'm more of a nonpartisan leaguer. And I agree with kind of the voters of the past, few years that the national party kind of left all of rural America. And maybe both parties did. And that's why, we had different type of administration this last 4 years. So both in state with Burgum as an outsider and Donald Trump as an outsider.
Well, how does that?
And this is the rural America saying, you have left us behind. As you know, I'm deeply an advocate for rural lifestyle and stability in our communities. I voted for Doug Burgum. I thought he was an outsider also. I thought he was a businessman, but he's just not getting the job done. And so I looked around, and well, maybe this speaks to you a little bit. I looked around to somebody I could financially support to run against him, and there wasn't somebody. And again, I totally believe in a two-party system, and so that's when I threw my hat in the ring, on top of other reasons. And again, I'm a great-granddaughter and granddaughter of the original Nonpartisan League, and that is so special to all North Dakotans. And I live in the reddest of red of North Dakota. I love, I can't survive and much less thrive out here unless I share the same values of some of my Republican fellow North Dakotans out here. So, and my platform is largely, you'll see my platform is largely nonpartisan.
Well, let's talk about that.
What about this a little bit? Yeah, let's
talk a little bit about that. As a matter of policy, like practical. These are my positions on the issues. What makes you distinct and independent as opposed to a Democrat?
Because I am not big government. I am not. I'm about lifting up our NPL roots when North Dakota government invested in North Dakota and North Dakotans to defend us from outside forces. It's very much so pro-North Dakota, which is a very rural state. I don't even know if any of it aligns with the Democrat, other than the NPL went with the Democratic Party because the NPL always went with the people. And that's why they were originally in the Republican Party, and then in the 50s, they felt the Republican people left the people, and that's when they aligned with the Democrats. And so there's certain things, like social things, that I definitely agree with in the Democrat Party. They're much more inclusive than the current Republican Party, especially the current Republican Party here in North Dakota. And I want to tell you, that's not normal. I mean, what the party represents in North Dakota is not what the people represent that I know out here.
Well, the people are sure, and especially in your part of the state, the people sure seem to be behind the Republican Party. I mean, that's just election.
No, they are.
I mean, election
yeah,
outcomes. I mean, that's
but they're not reflective of the North Dakota Republican Party platform.
Okay.
Which is kind of exclusive. Yeah.
Let's talk it again. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. The big thing the governor's office is dealing right now with is coronavirus. And you just recently had a big announcement about that. You had a plan. You released a plan. I was critical of it, but before we get into any of that, criticism or praise, tell us what's your plan? What's your plan? If you're elected, you take office in January. You're in charge of I think North Dakota governors take office maybe in December. I'm forgetting now. I think it's December. Yeah, that's right. I should know that.
Yeah.
But if you take office in December, what's your plan for addressing the coronavirus, and how is it distinct from what Governor Burgum's doing?
Okay, yeah, and this is critical because you can really compare and contrast how the two governors might lead. So with my plan versus how
John W. Fargo
handling the corona and economic crisis in North Dakota. So the three key points from the plan is it makes clear that we need decisive leadership. It also, number two, nothing related to the COVID crisis and economic crisis can be political. And that three, we need a leader, economy and our way of life and our health at the forefront. That is very, very different. It institutes an instant, and this is a very common, my structure is an incident commander structure, which is a very common crisis response. Most counties will know about it. Most people that deal with floods, anybody that deals with bioterrorism, anybody that deals with military operations, anybody deals with pandemics, anybody that deals with wildfires. It's really, it's a way of, again, separating the politics, the elected officials, from the non-elected officials with clear lines of communication, transparency, and roles. It equips people with the information and tools they need.
Separating the pie, I always, and again, you saw my criticism. I wrote a column. To me, that sounded a little bit like appointing somebody else to deal with the problem. And because I think politicians do that a lot. They don't want to touch a thorny issue, so they get a bunch of people who nobody voted for to form a committee or something. And then if people don't like what the committee's doing, they're like, oh, well, that's just that committee, and they could throw the committee under the bus. And it's a way of isolating themselves, plausible denial, whatever you want to call it, isolating themselves from accountability. I don't think politics are the means by which we make policy. If this incident commander is reporting to you, and you're a political leader, how are you separating the politics? I mean, how is that any different from the fact that under Governor Burgum, we have a state medical officer, and we've gone through a couple of them now, and if you wanted to criticize Governor Burgum for that would be in bounds, whether I agree with it or not. But how is an incident commander different than our state medical officer, which we already have?
Well, yeah, so if you look at Burgum's situation right now, I think he calls it unity of command. There is no unity of command. They cite like Tammy Miller or Wynn as their unity of command, but then, first they're part of his staff, and second, and so that means that they're his boss, right? But he's also, when he had Dr. Stahl, he says he doesn't listen to the health advisors because they don't have the economic considerations in their wheelhouse, or in that
isn't that important?
Politics and stuff.
I mean, if you hired somebody as an incident commander, and then the way they were going about their job, you didn't think that they were paying important to important facets of the problem, wouldn't you fire them? Or wouldn't you push back?
Well, so the incident commander, hopefully it's, first of all, building, competent teams.
Okay.
And Dr. Stahl was very competent. He would have been a perfect incident commander. But I think Dr. Stahl resigned, if I understand. And
he wasn't fired. I didn't mean to imply that, but I guess the point I'm getting at is I mean, at some point, though, because you've said all this stuff, but you're also saying that the buck stops. You're at the top of the chain of command. So I mean, if that's true, and you were looking and you're saying, hey, this incident commander, he's ignoring these parts of the problem, and he won't take that into account. I mean, at some point, wouldn't you say, hey, we're not getting along, we need to find somebody else for this job? I mean, is that not a fair thought?
No. So no, because that's using your political authority to well, that's mixing two things. So what it would be is, so for example, the incident commander advises not just the governor and lieutenant governor, but also the tribal leaders in the legislature. I would make an emergency legislative session as well. So
I agree with you on that.
Those elected officials, so those elected officials come up with the goals. And they are not in the day-to-day weeds. Governor Burgum is not a scientist, and he shouldn't even be kind of trying
Break
to
coming up.
because he doesn't do it well. The incident commander has the expertise and the knowledge to both advise up, speaking truth to power, and to manage and implement down. Now, if the incident commander came to me and said, Dr. Shelley, I have taken all the considerations of our unique culture, our unique geographic parameters, what we've seen in other states, and the best practices are a mass mandate, and we need to do this amount of testing here and this amount of testing there, and that's what I'm going to advise to you. And then me as governor, I can accept or decline that based on what I think it's going to do to protect North Dakotans. Well, hopefully that's what the governor is considering.
Well, I feel like that's exactly what he did with Dr. Saul.
If the incident commander came to me and said, Dr. Shelley, I think that we should, knowing that we're trying to get this virus under control, that's one of our goals, and winter's coming, we think the fastest way to get people to wear masks is to do a $1.8 million public monies advertisement ramp up that hasn't worked for the last 5 months.
But that's a policy disagreement.
I'm going to say no. And it's going to be very transparent what the incident commander has said to me, right? Right now, there's not a lot of transparency. It's only coming from when the journalist asks questions.
We got it.
So then, just so you know, then it's up to the governor will be held accountable by the voters for that. They're like, why did Dr. Shelley...
We can talk about it more after the break. We're going to hold Shelley over, and John, we'll get to your call right after the break, but I do have to tell you, I'm just not seeing how that's distinct from the situation we have now. But we'll talk about it. More straight ahead on The Jay Thomas Show. Rob Port, Shelley Lenz, candidate for governor on The Jay Thomas Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Rob Port and Democratic-NPL gubernatorial candidate Shelley Lenz, who also styles herself an independent. She is taking your question. We'll be talking about your COVID-19 plan and talking about some of them. We got a question about that. Listener says, COVID was widely recognized in the middle of March. Why did she wait 6 months to come out with her plan in the middle of September?
Okay. Well, that's a really excellent question because, first of all, I'm not the governor yet, and the governor should have had this in place 6 months ago. But I actually, as captain of my own ship, which is my hospital out here in my community, I implemented the exact same thing that I am asking to do, or that I'm putting here. I became the incident commander of my own ship, right? And I kept my community safe. I kept jobs open. I invested in my clinics so I can make sure that we could be keeping the, cases coming in. I did all that. I happen to be able to do that because I'm a veterinarian and a scientist, and I recognize I deal with emergencies, crisis management every day, either in an individual animal, on a population of animals, or sometimes in a whole community.
It's interesting.
I did this exact same thing, and you can look at that starting March 25th. The question is, why didn't Governor Burgum? I'm not the governor yet. Why didn't he do this? Why are we in a situation with rising hospitalized rates, rising caseloads, without any incident commander or unity of response? Who's advising him about the $1.8 million PSA? We're in distress, and the whole nation sees it. Why didn't Governor Burgum? He was not prepared. He doesn't know how to deal with crises.
And one thing,
captain of your ship.
One thing I was very critical of. I don't know if people remember this. I was very critical of Governor Burgum's campaign for governor in 2016. And one thing that I was fond of telling through my columns or writings, I guess, Governor Burgum, and I told this to his face a few times as well, is that government's not a business. It's one thing to make decisions as a business owner or an executive, but when you're dealing with the government and you're using the power of government, there are different branches, there are checks and balances, and you're governing people, and that's a much different thing than making decisions in your business. So, I guess that's something that interests me. I mean, you're talking about the policies you put in place for your veterinary clinic in Dickinson, and how is that the same as making decisions for government, in particular with a mask ban, which is I shouldn't say a mask ban, what do you want, a mask mandate? Is that the fair term for it?
Mask mandate, yeah.
So for instance,
public mask use,
yeah. So if you put that in place, for instance, it's one thing as a business owner to say, well, if you want to come onto my property, you want to come into my business, if you want to work for me, you're going to wear a mask. That's one thing. But when you're the government, it becomes a different thing. So, like, my question for you is how would you enforce that? Like somebody who refuses to comply with the mask.
Like the way I enforce it in my clinic. I mean, so first, clear communication with my staff about what the virus potential is and why we're doing things the way we are. Clear communications. I ask my staff, they have to make some sacrifices, some personal sacrifices, but they have a clear understanding that our goals is that we're trying to preserve jobs within the clinic and also cash flow. Also, very different than his type of business is I am a business of service, so I have to convince the community that it's safe and that I have their best interests at heart. And remember, small businesses usually have cash flow for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks max. So you have to be as conservative as possible. So, in managing that. And that's a big thing to do.
But at this point, the public's heard the case for masks. If they're not wearing masks, I mean, we've been inundated with it. If you're not wearing masks now, how are you going to make them?
Yeah. Well, that's what laws are for. How did we get
close to the bottom of the hour?
How did we make people? How do we make little kids wear winter coats?
So as a matter of policy, should people get? Well, should people get a ticket? I mean, we fine people. We
and
handcuff
John's still
them.
on too.
We put them in jail. I mean, what would you fine people? I mean, what's the penalty under the Shelley Lenz administration for not wearing a mask?
So as you know, out here, at least in Dickinson and Kildare, our police force are truly peacekeepers. And so basically this plan it puts the order in law and order. And that comes from collaborating, relationship building. Okay. I mean, the first time somebody's dog runs away, they usually know whose dog it is.
Sure.
They'll bring it back.
And that's very nice, but we just saw in South Dakota a guy.
Problem, and then how do they enforce? Wait, Rob. How do they enforce that every business has to do this? OSHA regulations. How do they enforce fire regulations?
Fines, jail
They
time.
come in and they make surprise visits and they check you out.
Sure. And if you're not wearing a mask, you get a ticket? I mean, I'm just trying to I mean, what in your mind, what's the appropriate punishment for not wearing a mask?
What happens when the fire group or the fireman comes in to your business for a spot inspection? And your fire extinguisher
your business may get closed down. You may face a fine. That's what I'm asking you. Is that what you want?
What they do is they tell you, nope, that's not what happens. What happens is
it can happen. If you violate the fire codes, they can.
And they come back and check.
Yeah. Okay. But if people still refuse to wear their mask, I mean, at some point, I mean, are you? I don't know if you're dodging. Are you not in favor of fining people, writing them a ticket if they don't want to wear a mask, or putting them in jail? I guess. I mean, I don't know. What would you support for somebody who just refuses to wear a mask?
Well, I'm support at giving. This plan gives our enforcement the tools and the authority to bring order back into our kind of destabilizing communities.
Okay.
That's what all law. That's law
I
and order.
gotta take another break. John is still waiting patiently on the line. John, I'm sorry, I completely forgot to get to your call. We'll get to him next. Also have a whole bunch of email questions. So we'll be right back after this. Rob Port, Shelley Lenz, don't go away. Welcome back. Rob Port in for Jay Thomas, talking with Shelley Lenz, candidate for governor. And before we go any further, we want to get to our caller, John from Fargo. John, go ahead. You're on with Shelley.
Well, good afternoon. So I'm going to ask you a tough question, Dr. Shelley. Assuming we wake up on November 4th and you're our new governor, and based on things that have been going on in cities like Portland, where the rioting and looting have been going on basically unchecked by both the mayor and the governor of the state of Oregon, combined with the fact that now not so much the governor, but the state of Minnesota is looking at moving the George Floyd trial potentially to Moorhead, which is a border city. To what level would you be willing to go to override our mayor if necessary to protect the city of Fargo from rioting and looting occurring, based on an event like this George Floyd trial, which has already proven to have sparked the violence nationwide? I'm going to hang up and listen. Yeah. You have a good day.
Yeah, thank you, John. So, that's a hot topic, and you start preparing now. We need to prepare all our law enforcement with proper training, proper understanding of de-escalation, relationships with the community, look for the community leaders. It's a collaborative effort that you should, definitely for a trial like that, but we should be doing that anyway. That's law and order. And law and order isn't just law and enforcement. It's relationship buildings and trainings and making sure that every police station and chief of police has the resources they need to make the most. And again, I call police officers peacekeepers because that's truly what they are. And it's, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And we should be doing that anyway. We should have started that. And I don't know what they've been doing specifically recently, but already looking for how do we train the best peacekeepers and where are our cracks in our relationship building.
Gabe, sticking on the
Can I, Rob? I do want to get back to one thing, just because I think it might clarify something between what an incident commander does and also enforcement. The incident commander, and let's just say he decides that the mask mandate is important, and I agree with him as the governor, and I have him do it. The incident commander would also have the expert knowledge of looking at other states, other rural states, like, say, Vermont, that is in the green now, and also more geographically similar to us, like Manitoba, a little bit culturally similar to us, and see what were the best practices they did to reach a higher level of compliance. So that's what the incident commander does.
And I guess our discussion was at some point you're going to have people who just aren't going to wear the mask. And I guess I'm wondering.
Well, there's people that don't wear a seatbelt, right? But if
and those people could get a traffic ticket. And if I'm not wearing my seatbelt, I could get a traffic ticket. Are you looking at
like that though? It didn't start like that, Rob.
No, but it's like that now, and I guess that's what I'm.
They could only send you a ticket if you were stopped for something else.
I'm just trying to find out what you would enforce, how you would enforce, because it's one thing to say wear your masks. If you don't enforce it, then it's really no different than what Governor Burgum's doing now, where he's telling people to wear their masks.
But that's why you make it a law, right?
Okay.
North Dakotans are law-abiding.
And what's the punishment if you break the law?
Sure.
And what's the punishment if you break the law? Nothing.
But that's where the incident commander comes in and brings best practices.
But that's exactly my criticism, Dr. Shelley. That's exactly where you're the governor. What law?
John from South Dakota.
But I am not the expert in law enforcement.
So you're going to hire somebody else to be. Well, you should be an expert in the law. Part of being a governor is making policy, making law. The legislature is going to ask you to say yay or nay on every bill they pass.
Based on expert opinion that is given to me with transparency and clarity that will also be.
So you need somebody to tell you. You need somebody else. You need somebody else to tell you whether or not there should be a fine for not wearing a mask, for instance.
What's that? Say that again.
Do you need somebody else to tell you whether or not there should be a fine for a mask?
No, I mean, I think, like, how does
James from Fargo.
implemented?
Well,
right?
let's.
I mean, I don't know what the confusion is on that. You act like we don't have any laws.
We do have laws, but every
here.
law has an enforcement. If I break the speed limit, I can get a ticket.
That is our police. That's our businesses.
So what punishment?
OSHA,
Punishment is it? A traffic ticket? I mean, what punishment for not wearing a mask? That's the question.
Well, I'll see what the best practices are that can increase compliance and keeps peace in the town.
Okay.
And in the business.
We got a call.
Right now, we are sent adrift. Right now, we're sent adrift by pushing all the responsibility to the business owner. And I can't tell you get some clients that are not happy because they don't understand.
We have a caller, James from Fargo. Go ahead, James. James, go ahead. Hello,
Are you talking John?
Oh, John. Okay, sorry, we must have got the name wrong. Go ahead, John.
Well, I just wondered. Well, maybe somebody got in ahead. So I guess I kind of wanted to follow up that first question, which I thought was kind of interesting, right? And it's a what if.
Hey.
Hello, did we lose him?
Hello?
I think we lost him.
What happened there.
Let's keep moving on. I do have an email from Gabe. Gabe asks, and he's got a question about marijuana. He asks, do you support medical cannabis, ending the federal prohibition of cannabis, decriminalization, legalization? So basically, what's your position on marijuana, basically?
I support legalization. I mean, I actually, prior to being a veterinarian, I have a PhD in pharmacology, heavy in the neurosciences, and so I happen to have a deep understanding about some of those psychoactive drugs, and I support legalization.
All right.
James is back on.
All right, we have James.
And that's also good for our farmers, right?
Okay.
Hemp.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And that helps with mental health and all this other
agree.
stuff.
I've been for legalization for a long time. We have James back. Go ahead, James. We have a couple minutes left with Dr. Shelley. Go ahead.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for taking my call. You guys we're throwing around the word mask pretty loosely, okay? If we think people walk around with gaiters or bandanas around there, that we think that's doing something, it's just not. The size of this virus is less than 1 micron in size. It's going right through all this stuff. And it's ridiculous. Unless we have tight-fitting masks to our face, then we can use the word mask. Other than that, we're fooling ourselves. What they need to be stressing more than anything, and they're not, is hand washing, okay? Hand washing. There should be commercials on every 5 minutes teaching people how to wash their hands properly. I've been a hand-washing nut my whole life, but this is insanity that we're going with. This baloney about what they consider masks is a joke.
James,
the whole thing's a joke.
James, thanks for the call.
And if you want to have masks, that's fine. But make a mask that actually matter, okay?
Okay, James.
Putting some cloth in front of your face is not.
I think we got the point, James. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think masking helps. I mean, there's
partially right, and then that's why we say masks, social distancing, and hand washing.
Greg, South Fargo.
Never just a silver bullet.
Let's
right?
sneak in.
And we're learning more and more about masks, and we're getting
I'm
better
pro-mask.
materials and all that stuff.
We agree on masks. I'm pro-mask. I think people should wear them. I'm a little more skeptical of the mandates. We got another caller from South Fargo. I didn't catch the name, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm on. This is Greg, South Fargo.
Yes, Greg, you're on.
Yeah, 2 quick things. First of all, the rates in North Dakota.
John, who got cut off, is back on line 2.
Higher than ever. The rates in Minnesota are very high. This Einstein that called before me, does he have any better ideas to stop it other than wearing a mask? Let us all know, and we'll gladly know. Otherwise, tell him to keep his mouth shut and put on the mask for everybody's sake. And secondly, this is for the person running for governor, maybe to keep senior citizens in their homes in the state of North Dakota. We could implement a special rate for senior citizens 65 and older, where they pay maybe no more than an appraised value of.
Need to get into a break as well.
Home, and they pay a prorated rate for that since they are 65 and older, limited income, and they've always already paid sales tax fully before, and this way you could help seniors stay in their homes rather than see them leave because of cost of living and move out.
Greg, thanks.
And I'll hang up and listen.
Thanks. That's last question. Shelley, go ahead.
And I think that's important. So we have to remember we're dealing with a health crisis and an economic crisis. So part of the Lenz Big COVID crisis management plan is some of the economic policies that we would institute, which is why we need to bring in an emergency legislative session. Again, we need to, stay constitutionally correct, bring in all co-equal branches of government, legislative, governor, judicial, and let's get us out of this crisis so we can all get back to work.
Well, I do think the legislature should have been in session. We do have a lot of areas we agree, but hey, if we're going to have a debate, or I guess you weren't debating me. I'm not running for governor. Rob Port couldn't get elected governor.
But we're running out of time. But Rob, I'm more than happy to come on.
And we're going to have another conversation. We're going to have another conversation before this is done. I got to go to a break. Shelley, you got other things to do. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it. More to come straight ahead on the Jay Thomas Show. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back, Rob Port, closing out the second hour of the Jay Thomas Show. Just got done having a discussion with Shelley Lenz, who I really like. I really like Shelley Lenz. Now, I'm not ready to vote for her for governor, mostly for ideological reasons, but I think she's a nice person. I think she's maybe a departure from, as I said, other Democratic-NPL candidates in the recent past. Hey, coming up, we're going to discuss Measure 2 in the next hour. State Representative Scott Louser, he's a Republican from Minot, is going to be on. Measure 2, of course, is the measure that would reform the initiated measure process for constitutional measures. This is getting a lot of attention. We had a very controversial measure kept off the ballot earlier this year, but there was a growing displeasure, and I think I've made it pretty clear. I'm not a fan of the initiated measure process. I've had that position for a long time. But there's growing concern, I think, in the public among people who are looking at it's intended to be this citizen-led grassroots volunteers out there collecting signatures because they have some idea that the legislature just isn't getting to for whatever reason, and it's not that anymore. Now it's mostly deep-pocketed interests who spend a bunch of money and throw a bunch of money around, and billionaires. I mean, there's been 2 billionaires in the last the last 6 years? 2 billionaires. Last 4 years, actually, if you think about it. 2 billionaires in the last 4 years that have set out to amend North Dakota's Constitution. One, Henry Nicholas, the guy behind the Marsy's Law campaign, was successful. And people say, oh, well, the people voted for those measures, they must like it. Well, they voted for the measures, after a campaign where these billionaires they could just throw money and just wall-to-wall TV ads. And if you oppose this, you're supposed to go dollar to dollar with a billionaire? Now, in the legislature, we have checks and balances. We have 2 houses of the legislature. We have all sorts of different people from around the state elected to it. The governor's office gets to weigh in. There's checks and balances. And I'm wondering, why can't there be checks and balances in the initiated measure process as well? To me, that's what I see Measure 2 as. I'm going to vote for Measure 2. And here to talk about it in the next hour, Representative Louser is one of the people who sponsored Measure 2 in the legislature. We're going to talk about it, and I'd love to hear what you think. So stay tuned for that. Coming up next, right here on the Jay Thomas Show, as we enter Hour 3. You don't want to go anywhere. You want to stay right here. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Rob Port, in for Jay Thomas today, entering Hour 3, where we're going to talk about the initiated measure process. Now, I think a lot of people are anticipating that we were going to spend, here in North Dakota anyway, a lot of the election season debating Measure 3. But Measure 3 ended up being kept off the ballot by the state Supreme Court. It really had nothing to do with what Measure 2 would do. They made an error when they drafted and in the way they circulated the measure, which disqualified the measure from the ballot. So that issue isn't really relevant, only except to say that the manner in which Measure 3 was supported financially, in a way a lot of these initiated measure campaigns have been conducted, has people worried, including people in the legislature. Here to talk about that is State Representative Scott Louser. He is one of the lawmakers who sponsored the legislation that ultimately became what is now Measure 2 on the statewide ballot. Now, the reason why, if you don't understand how this works, the reason why something the legislature passed is now on the ballot is that in North Dakota, if the legislature wants to amend the Constitution, they must first pass the amendment, and then the amendment goes on the ballot, and the people must approve it on the statewide ballot as well. So that's why Measure 2 is on the ballot. What it would do is it would create an additional step in the process for constitutional amendments. Now, this would not apply to statutory measures. So, for instance, the recent medical marijuana measure, that was a statutory measure. None of this would apply to that. This would say if you want to amend the Constitution, so we're talking about something like Marzy's Law that's created, quote-unquote, new rights in the state constitution. If you want to do that, there's an additional step. After it's passed on the statewide ballot, it goes to the legislature, and the legislature can give it a thumbs up, thumbs down. House, Senate votes. If they give it a thumbs up, the amendment's enacted. If they give it a thumbs down, it goes on the next general election ballot again, and if the people approve it again, then it's enacted. If the people say no the second time, then it's over. So it stretches out the timeline, adds some additional steps, but I like it. There should be checks and balances in the way the initiated measure process works, particularly when it comes to the state constitution. Scott, did I get all that right? Am I describing this issue correctly?
You got all that right, Rob. Good job.
Well, thank you. So why did you support this in the first place? I mean, why you're in the legislature? This idea comes to your why support this?
Well, there were a number of measures that were debated. Actually, I had one where I was the prime sponsor, and that was at the time that was what I would call my favorite. I was a co-sponsor of this one. Ultimately, the legislature, and I think we'll get into this in a bit, decided to put one measure on the ballot, and collectively between the House and the Senate, they felt this was the best measure, better than the one I proposed. I think I may agree with that now. And I served on a commission in the interim between 17 and 18 that included a number of citizens, and we were really looking at ways to preserve and protect the amendment process in North Dakota, and that was long before the session. Of course, that was long before Measure 3 was on the ballot. So it just seems odd to me that an out-of-state interest group, and I'm going to focus on out-of-state, but we can talk about in-state as well. If you have enough money and you can collect enough signatures, you can put something on the ballot and change our Constitution, but you don't have to live here to do so. You have to live here to vote on it, but you don't have to live under the law that you propose to change in North Dakota. It just doesn't seem right. One vote, 50% plus one at the ballot box on Election Day, amend the Constitution.
And that's what we had.
Because easy.
We had a couple of these. If we're talking about Marzy's Law, there was a billionaire out of California by the name of Henry Nicholas. He was supporting these laws in multiple states, but he doesn't live in North Dakota. I don't know if he's ever even been to North Dakota. And yet he amended our state constitution by spending a bunch of money. Measure 3 this cycle. Now, it was ultimately kept off the ballot by the state Supreme Court, but there was a billionaire who made his fortune, initially at least, working for Enron, which is a ignominious way, I think, to put yourself on a path towards being a billionaire, but so be it. He was funding, and we didn't see the full extent of what he was going to end up contributing, or through a nonprofit activist group that he created, how much that they were going to contribute to the Measure 3 campaign. We didn't get a chance to see because the courts ultimately kicked it off. But it was hundreds of thousands of dollars just getting started. And Scott, when you say collect signatures, they're paying to collect the signatures. Like there, I went back and did the math, and one company, Advanced Micro-Targeting, they collected signatures for Marzy's Law. They collected signatures for the ethics measure 1 last cycle, which, by the way, was the same people that backed Measure 3 this cycle. They collected signatures for the citizenship voting issue in North Dakota. That was also on the last ballot. They've over $1.3 million they've been paid to collect signatures for ballot measures, many of them constitutional measures, since 2016. That is an enormous amount of money. And Scott, I don't think most people understand that's what's going on. It's kind of pay to play, just buying your way onto the ballot.
Well, I guess there's a few ways we could look at this. Do you want to raise the threshold of the number of signatures? That's just going to increase the money spent. Do you want to raise the threshold for the vote and make it a 60% instead of 50% plus one? There are a number of things that we looked at in that commission in 17 and 18 and then considered again last session. But you're right. One of the things we talked about was potentially putting the whole measure, the whole constitutional amendment on the ballot. Now, I don't know how many people would have done what I did, but I sat up one night and I counted the words on Measure 3. It was well over 1,100 words. Only 5% of that language had to do with military active duty voting that were serving overseas, voting 60 days instead of 45 days. 5%. So we were potentially going to have an amendment to our Constitution with over 1,000 words that most people, I suspect, did not stand in front of a grocery store at the North Dakota State Fair or wherever they might have signed the petition and read those 1,000 words. They were told it has to do with military ballot access. Would you support that? And then, if so, sign here. I don't know if anybody read 1,000 words, but the Constitution is not the place to put a 1,000-word amendment when you want to change what we're doing in North Dakota.
701-293-9000, 888-970-9329, email talk@wday.com. If you want to weigh in on this, we're talking about what is Measure 2 on this ballot. And getting to our point, one thing you just mentioned, changing the day, that was the big thing with Measure 3, where they were trying to pretend it was only about military voting. And it really wasn't. I mean, it did all sorts of weird things to the way we elect people in North Dakota and the way we do apportionment and everything else. We don't need to get into that. It's a moot issue now. But the thing that you just mentioned is moving the election day from, for military voting 45 days out to 60 days. That would have uprooted our entire political process. I don't know if people understand that. We don't have ballots printed 60 days out. As a matter of fact, a lot of those races 60 days out are not necessarily even certified. Like we wouldn't necessarily, we would have to change that entire timeline in order to make something like that work. So, that would have been hugely problematic, which I think is the point Matt's making in an email. He says, I quote, "A check on ballot measures are very necessary, in my opinion, if for nothing else than the fact of the language of initiated measures. The ballot initiatives in North Dakota have been some of the most poorly written pieces of legislation in modern times, often overlooking the most basic items like being in direct conflict with existing law, or not even being in consultation with the very agencies they seek to expand or fundamentally change. This has resulted in implementation resembling shoveling a square peg in a round hole." I think that's very much a part of the problem that we're facing, Scott. Maybe not one. Well, maybe Measure 2 would address it. By stretching out that timeline, it gives the public more time to scrutinize it in a way that sort of maybe outside of the heated atmosphere of the campaign season when there's a lot of other distractions going on. Measure 2 would allow us to shine a brighter spotlight on the constitutional measures that are before they become law. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, Rob, let me cut right to the chase on that one. The process currently in North Dakota, you get the signatures and you get on the ballot, and then if you have the money, you just do a slick advertising campaign and say, vote yes on my measure. Never is there a requirement for anybody to get up before the public and defend why they think we need to change our Constitution. And so my opinion, and I think that this is borne out, is if that were to pass, it would go before the legislature. Part of this amendment, Measure 2, would require constitutional amendments to only be on the general election ballot.
Right.
So if one were to pass in November, we go into session in January, and the House and the Senate would take that up and hold hearings. And then we would have the opponents and the proponents, maybe for the first time, have to get up and say why this is necessary for our state. Could be very likely the first time that the out-of-state opponent or the out-of-state proponents have to publicly defend their position.
Or they're hired local representatives, as the case may be.
That might be the case, yes. We would find that out. And then the legislature would ask who, what, where, when, why, and how, and then try to make an informed decision. Now, if we find that is practical and it made sense and the voters passed it and we vote yes, it goes in the Constitution. If one of the two chambers votes no, then 1 year and 7 months later, it goes back on the general election ballot that following November. So, and by the way, there's a little confusion here. The legislature absolutely cannot amend the language. You either vote yes or no on what was passed by the citizens of North Dakota that prior general election.
Just an up or down.
There is no ability to amend.
I likened it to a veto. Now, I know some of the supporters of Measure 2 don't like that language, but really it's almost the legislature taking on what the governor's role is when the legislature's legislating. The governor's not, as a matter of fact, we had a little bit of a dust-up between Governor Burgum and the legislature not that long ago that went to the state Supreme Court. The governor's not allowed to change the laws that come to his desk. He only gets to say up or down, yay or nay. He does have a line item veto on appropriations bills, but even there, he can't do it in a way that changes the policy. He can only, I guess, take out certain types of funding. So that's sort of a bet, and that's essentially what the legislature would have here is a veto. You know, the people would send it to the legislature. The legislature just gets to do thumbs up, thumbs down. That's it. Doesn't get to amend, doesn't get to change. If it's thumbs down, it goes back to the voters, and the voters, much like the legislature, can override, much like the legislature overriding the governor's veto, the people can override the legislature's veto. To me, that's checks and balances. That's a beautiful thing, and it should work. Now, Scott, the common refrain, and I'm sure you've heard this, the common refrain from people who are opponents of Measure 2, and I've seen some in newspaper editorials, letters to the editor, social media posts. There's a group that's formed, I guess, to oppose Measure 2. And what they like to suggest is that this is the legislature meddling in the people's business. This is you dastardly legislatures. You hate the people, and you hate that they get a say in legislating. You're jealous of your legislative power, and so you want to take it away from the people and guard it for yourselves. That's their argument. What do you say to rebut that?
Well, two things. I think anybody that knows me, my voting record, would agree that I'm not a big proponent of additional government. I also, in North Dakota, I really don't, as a legislator, really don't seek additional power. I think, at least from my perspective, I just want to do what's best for North Dakota. And what I think is best for North Dakota here is to give the citizens the opportunity to shed some daylight on what exactly was in the measure that likely they were told by a good advertising campaign that this is right for the state. And I want to point something out that I have not heard in a debate anywhere or in discussion with anybody. And I want to be very real about this. If there was a constitutional amendment being circulated or placed on the ballot, almost every legislator is going to know through the process whether that was generated as an actual grassroots campaign in North Dakota or if it came from out of state. But let's say that somebody didn't. Let's say they were living under a rock and they didn't know. When they get into the legislature, those questions are going to bring that out. Where did this come from? Why do we need this? If it's a North Dakota, truly North Dakota grassroots generated constitutional amendment and it passes, it's going to be very, very difficult for any legislator to vote no. So let's just set that aside. We're going to know the North Dakota generated amendments. Now we're talking about out of state. Same theory applies here. If you didn't know where it was generated, you're certainly going to find out the next session. And likely a lot more information is going to come out. And at that point, you might have the legislature voting no. And even then, it's not necessarily a veto because the follow-up vote by the citizens is not a 2/3 vote. It's, again, 50% plus one. So it's even a lower threshold than the example that we used with overriding a governor's veto. it isn't a 2/3 vote on the next election.
right.
It's 50% plus one.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of fear-mongering
Coming up on a break
about Measure 2. But we have to take a break, Scott. Can you hold on? And I'd like to talk a little bit more before we end. So can you hold on through the break?
Absolutely.
State Representative Scott Louser, he's a Republican from Minot, also one of the creators of what is now Measure 2 on the statewide ballot. You're going to be hearing a lot about this if you haven't already in the coming weeks. Love to get your call, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. We'll be back right after this.
Tonight on WDAY News at 6.
Thousands of Fargo students will move to distance learning. We sit down with Superintendent Rupak Gandhi and ask what led to this decision.
The blue skies have returned to the forecast, and it is warming up with that sunshine. A few 80s popping up on the map, and we're expecting temperatures to continue to climb a little bit even tomorrow. The thing that will be changing as well, that breezy wind that will start to come down. Tell you how fast coming up.
Those stories tonight on WDAY News at 6.
Listen up, Fargo Moorhead. Stop paying rent. People's Home Equity Mortgage can help you get into a home.
You may be surprised at how much you can afford, and it might be less than what you are paying in rent. Contact me, Shane Tibiatowski, NMLS 194550 at 701-390-1674, or visit us online at peopleshomeequityfargo.com. I have the knowledge and the team to make your home buying process a breeze.
Small towns always seem to have the best bars, like Leonard, North Dakota, and the Ringneck Bar and Grill. It's good American food, from chicken and half-pound burgers to prime rib, Indian tacos, and walleye. You get large portions, a potato and salad bar, and late-night dining. Plus, the Ringneck has daily specials and card games and tournaments year-round. Nicole and her friendly staff welcome you to the Ringneck Bar and Grill in Leonard. You'll meet some good people there. Like them on Facebook for today's special.
Did you know that in the United States, one person commits suicide every 13 minutes? Or that it's estimated that more than 5 million people in the United States have been directly affected by a suicide? When suicidal behaviors are detected early, lives can be saved. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. Please join Solace Counseling, Creative Spirit Counseling, and Solutions Behavioral Healthcare Professionals in supporting suicide prevention. Together we can reduce the number of lives shaken by a needless and tragic death.
Minn Kota Power Cooperative, the region's wholesale energy supplier, reminds you to look up for power lines during the harvest season. Every year, especially during harvest season, as well as the planting and construction season, Minn Kota receives calls of incidents involving raised truck boxes, augers, backhoes, and other equipment coming in contact with our power lines. Avoid such a potential deadly incident by looking up and around when you're operating machinery. This message brought to you by Minn Kota Power and its member systems, who want you to go home safely to your family today.
More of the Jay Thomas Show in 60 seconds.
WDAY Deal of the Week. This week, take advantage of two great deals. The first is for Deeks Pizza. Pick up $20 certificates for just $10. Check them out online at deekspizza.com. The second deal is for tickets to the Buffalo River Pumpkin Patch. Pick up 4 tickets, a $20 value for just $10. The patch is open for the season September 26th through October 31st. Get details on hours, attractions, and activities at BuffaloRiverPumpkinPatch.com. Two great deals of the week on sale Thursday morning at 8 at WDAY.com. Click on the Deals tab.
Stay one step ahead of severe weather and be prepared.
Back in 30 seconds, and then we'll have about 7.5 minutes till we need to take a break.
Change, get alerts and updates straight from the WDAY Storm Tracker team with accurate weather reports specific to your area. Just search WDAY in the Apple or Google Play Store. Download the Storm Tracker app and be ready to plan your day. The Storm Tracker app, powered by Laney's. Download it today.
Welcome back. This is Rob Port sitting in for Jay Thomas. If you're wondering who in the world is talking and not Jay Thomas, it's me. The B Squad, right? Is that what we're calling ourselves, Ronnie? The B Squad today because Jay's out?
I guess this would be the point where I say speak for yourself.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, I am.
All right. No, that's fine. I'm the B Squad. Ronnie's the A Squad. We're talking about Measure 2 with my guest, State Representative Scott Louser. And Scott, we just before the end of the last segment, we were talking a little bit about this claim that the legislature was motivated to pass Measure 2 because they're trying to jealously guard the legislative process. They don't like the people horning in on it. And I don't think that's at all. And I always think it's interesting because it's like people divorce like the legislature is this some other entity from the rest of the political process, as if you guys aren't popularly elected as well. If the legislature gets in the habit of shooting down popular ballot measures that were passed by the people, there are going to be consequences for that at the ballot box. I mean, I think people forget the same electorate that votes on initiated measures also votes for the people who sit in the legislature, and you folks are accountable to them. And it's bizarre to me that people draw that distinction. I don't understand why they do it, other than I guess just out of convenience for their talking points. But I really don't. What we're talking about here is a process, not trying to lock anybody out of it, but just making sure that any process that creates law as important as what resides in our state constitution is vigorous and subjects the proposals to a lot of scrutiny and, frankly, some checks and balances, a lot of which is missing from the current process.
Well, I'll give you a couple, probably both sides of why that might be happening. And I'm okay with this because we should have a healthy dose of skepticism on government. When the legislature puts forward an idea, likely on the ballot, maybe voters should be inclined to vote no unless they're convinced or really substantially understand why the need for the change, and then vote yes. Since 2012, and I'm not going to count the 2020 ballot, but 2012 to 2018, we've had 17 constitutional amendments on the ballot. 17. If this measure were in place back in 2012, only 4 of those 17 would have gone to the legislature, and I wouldn't even say veto, I'd say ratification. It would have been the ethics measure and the citizenship measure, the 2 that you brought up. Marcy's Law, which was 2016, and then the Farming and Ranching Technology measure in 2012. So almost every year, almost every election cycle, we have a constitutional amendment on the ballot. And maybe the citizens should be skeptical. I'm skeptical of government. I'm skeptical of what's going on in D.C., so I'm going to ask those questions. I don't mind the debate. I think it's healthy. But I certainly... if we look at how many measures the legislature's put on versus how many the citizens have put on in that time frame, I think it's about 12 to 5. So the legislature is actually putting more measures on the ballot than the citizens for the citizens to consider.
And I don't think that the legislature's been successful with one in that time period either.
Well, no, we have been, and I'm proud of this one.
That's right. That was yours. That was yours. I forgot all about it. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And that year, I think there was 6 or 7 on the ballot,
and yours
and all
was
of
the
them failed
lone
by double
survivor
digits,
out of
one.
that. Yeah, yours was the lone survivor out of that bloodbath. I remember that now. Okay, so listen, to me, process is important. How we arrive at the laws that are going to govern us is important, and I like a process. Right now, what we have is anybody who can pay or anybody can collect the signatures. Easier for some people when you can pay other people to do it. Anybody can go out and do that, and anybody can put their issue on the ballot. And there's not, and then we end up debating it and trying to scrutinize it in an election year where we're also often having a very vigorous debate over the presidential race and maybe a Senate race and a congressional race and maybe, some local legislative races, and maybe there's some other ballot measures too, and maybe there's some local measures and some local issues, and you're expected to pay attention to all of this. And then the advertising starts and you get bombarded, and pretty soon Kelsey Grammer's on your TV telling you what you should amend North Dakota state constitution to say. And I just don't know that that's a good environment if that's the proper route for, again, a document as important as the state constitution. Scott, last word to you.
Well, I think this is a really good discussion, and I think it's important that the voters understand that the legislature put this on the ballot for the voters to consider, not for the legislature to consider. And as before and going forward, the only way to change our Constitution, regardless of the passage of Measure 2, is if the citizens vote yes. That remains even with the passage of Measure 2. It's just an additional measure to force the forum for public debate that doesn't exist right now, primarily for people that are funding out of state, coming in from out of state, funding a measure to change our way of life.
Scott, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob.
Got to take a break. More of the Jay Thomas Show straight ahead. Hey, we're going to talk a little bit more. I got a bunch of emails about this. A little bit more about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and should Republicans appoint a replacement? Should they not appoint a replacement? Your phone call straight ahead, 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back, Rob Port, in for Jay Thomas. In the sunset of today's show, I'll be back on again tomorrow. Senator Kevin Cramer will be joining me, and I'm certain that we're going to be discussing the topic that, well, I started the show with, and I want to discuss with you right now. Obviously, it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I should note both of North Dakota's senators, and you've probably heard this by now, both of North Dakota senators saying that they are supportive of voting on a new nominee under the Trump administration. As for Minnesota, I'm sure they're Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar, both Democratic senators, probably feel opposite. I feel like most so far, except for a couple of Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, Susan Collins in Maine, for the most part, this has been breaking down this issue of whether or not a Ginsburg replacement should be voted on is breaking down along party lines. Republicans are the ones that have to hold their coalition together to have a 50+1 vote. Have a number of emails about this. Brad emails Rob, both sides are full of hypocrisy. Either side could have brought up procedures for this situation after the 2016 debacle. Back then, Democrats were screaming that the president should get to nominate someone, and Republicans said no. Now it's just the opposite. They could have changed things after that, but nobody did. Typical Washington, so suck it up and vote. Maybe they should look at putting some rules in place later for when it happens again, but that would require those in Washington to do some actual work and negotiating. Good luck. I actually agree with Brad. I liked it when there was a filibuster. I liked it when everything that came out of the Senate had to have at least some level of bipartisan buy-in. That's essentially what the filibuster was. And we don't do that anymore. And who put us on that road? Well, Democrats. Republicans certainly helped, but he's right. Another email writes, probably a dumb question, but could she have named her successor? Now, I'm pretty sure he's referring to Justice Ginsburg. No. The U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, gives the authority to appoint Supreme Court justices to the President of the United States. That's currently Donald Trump. The Constitution did not give that authority to members of the Supreme Court. So, no, Justice Ginsburg could not name her successor. She reportedly said on her deathbed that she wanted the next president to appoint her replacement, and I'm here to tell you, all due respect to Justice Ginsburg, but she doesn't have that authority either. The Constitution gives the authority to one person, the President Donald Trump, to make that appointment, and then, of course, the Senate has an advise and consent role, and the justices have no say in it one way or the other. Certainly they could speak out publicly, but officially they have no thoughts. Another emailer, Rob, please give us your thoughts about the veteran senators, O'Connell and Graham, saying a few years ago, a new president must select the new justice when an election is near. No wonder people have no faith in politics when these people's words don't matter. Words do matter. Now, you're not going to, if you're looking for somebody to defend hypocrisy, I'm not going to do it. There's hypocrites all over the place on this one. I will say that there are some differences. Everybody keeps pointing to a previous emailer as well, the Merrick Garland situation in 2016. That was President Obama's nominee to replace the deceased Anthony Scalia on the Supreme Court. Now, Republicans opted not to bring that to a vote. They're saying the distinction between those situations is that the White House and the Senate weren't controlled by the same party. It was a Democratic White House, a Republican Senate. Because there was a partisan divide there, they said, hey, let's have an election, and then we will confirm the new judges under the new constitution of our federal government. as the voters weighed in. Now, is that enough of a difference to say that the people who are saying vote now versus who are saying, hey, let's delay things back in 2016, are they hypocrites now? Yeah, I think still probably a little bit. But if you're looking for people who aren't hypocrites, you better not look in politics. 701-293-9000, 888-970-9329. Email talk@wday.com. Another emailer asks, Rob, could Trump nominate Kamala Harris? Then maybe they will have something to impeach him on. The president can nominate whoever he wants. He could nominate me. There's no requirements in the Constitution about who that person could be. They could be a current office holder. In fact, I think that's been the case in the past. You don't even necessarily have to have any legal training. You don't have to be a lawyer to be a Supreme Court justice. Now, I think somebody who doesn't have the requisite legal experience probably is not going to get through a Senate confirmation. And I got to tell you, who would want to go through that process, Ronnie, after we see what Judge Kavanaugh was put through? My goodness, I got to think that some of the people who are on President Trump's list, do they even want the nomination at this point, or are they terrified? I'd be scared to go through that. People looking through every crook and cranny of your life, my gosh, it's terrifying. Another email from Sean says, hi, Rob, just wanted to make a comment on the justice appointment. Why does the timing make a difference? Terms are 4 years. It is of no benefit to limit an elected official to a shorter timeline of which they can effectively govern. Our president was elected for 4 years, albeit lame duck or not. If Ruth's dying wish was to not be replaced by a Republican, she had the opportunity for 8 years prior to President Trump. Giving up the opportunity and responsibility that is granted to any sitting president does not make any sense. Democrats would not bow to a moral standard on this. I see no issue with 45 doing it either. I think that's absolutely true. I think if the roles were reversed and we were talking about a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate, and say Clarence Thomas was leaving the United States Supreme Court and was leaving a vacancy. Obviously very, very conservative jurist in Clarence Thomas. Would Democrats feel the need to wait till after the election to appoint a new person? And I think the answer to that is no. They would be taking the exact opposite position from what they are taking now, which is my point, that everybody here is hypocrites. Now, I do think there is a well-made point here, and I wonder if we're going to talk about reforming this process, Ronnie, what would you think about term limits for United States Supreme Court justices?
It would be extremely interesting. You know, obviously there's no precedent.
No,
for
it's never been that way. It's been lifetime appointments since the office was created.
It's interesting because my girlfriend and I were talking about that very issue just a few days ago. You know, would it be something where you're asking people that, you know, you don't want them on there until they're 85, 90 years old? You know, I mean, how effective would they be? I mean, at some point you're in the twilight of your years, your capacity maybe isn't what it once was, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, being a Supreme Court justice is grueling. I mean, these are very, very complex issues. A lot of times we just get we hear about sort of the sexy cases that come out of the Supreme Court, the very news, but they deal with a lot of stuff that is very, very nuanced and very, very complicated. Very, very
Matt on hold, Rob. Matt.
And so what bothers me a little bit is that Justice Ginsburg held on for so long. And she's certainly not the first Supreme Court justice to die on the job. William Rehnquist did. I mean, a lot of them have. Anthony Scalia did. But
Matt and Ken.
But we had with Justice Ginsburg, she's had declining health for a long time. And a lot of people, because there's been this sort of cult of personality that has built up around her. And you're sort of not allowed to say this, but she's been falling asleep during oral arguments for a while. It's happened more than once. It's happened several times. Now, Supreme Court oral arguments, they're not televised. And I feel like if they were, maybe she would have been criticized for this more. But she's been falling asleep, you know, sometimes for as long as, 15, 20 minutes at a time, doing her job, falling asleep on the job. She's also fallen asleep in public. She fell asleep during multiple State of the Union addresses where the Supreme Court justices come and sit down. So she's falling asleep in public. So you have to ask yourself, was she still doing the job? And did she hold on to it so long? You know, people talk about how tough she was holding on and everything. Why didn't she let it go? You know, rather than looking tough and everything else, it begins to look a little bit like arrogance. Matt has a call. Matt, go ahead. What's up?
I don't, well, I was calling about the potential for reform, which I think is just not even possible. But as far as your comment about, you know, the potential arrogance, or I don't know, you're just thinking out loud here, but that to me doesn't seem to be, you know, oftentimes I try to look at how they live their life necessarily if I'm going to try to read into a motivation or something that's intrinsic. You know, it seems to me that given her friendship with Scalia, she was genuinely someone that didn't believe that you had to unfriend somebody that you disagreed with.
She wasn't a cancel culture person.
No. She's the opposite of what so many people partisanly have become. That I see, I'm sure you do too. I see these arguments made on
Sure.
social media that, you know, it's just not possible. You just can't do it. You know,
Well, the point I was just making.
How many people have to go into poverty to have or die for your policy beliefs to be and you know, unpalatable to our friendship.
Yeah.
That and the like.
Yeah.
She did not espouse that kind of thing. Absolutely.
Despite the
to
fact
me,
that many of the people who are venerating her now did, but my point was
right.
not even really
Exactly.
about. My point wasn't even really about her politics, which obviously I'm a conservative. She was a very liberal jurist. There's a lot of disagreement there, but to me it's a completely nonpartisan question. If you can't stay awake on the job, maybe it's time to move on.
And that's a legitimate question, but I don't know that it ultimately strategically, it doesn't seem like that strategic part of it. You know, she had 8 years under Obama. I don't think she given the other aspects of her life as we're discussing them here, it doesn't seem like that type of strategy really came into play for her. You know, again, looking what her history was as how overwhelmingly she was approved.
But then how do you square that with her purported last questions where she wanted the next president to appoint her? How do you square that then?
If you've been in hospice with somebody, I'm not going to put any weight whatsoever on what her purported last words were or last words. That's nonsense. I'm just not gonna. I'm not gonna do it.
Well, and it's irrelevant because she doesn't get to pick her successor. She doesn't get to determine when her successor will be appointed. The Constitution's very clear on that. It's President Trump's authority. Matt, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. We have another caller. Go ahead. You're up.
Yeah, so if this all plays out, you know, I mean, and I don't want Joe Biden to win the election, but were he to, he would not be able to, even if he did it on day one, he would not be able to appoint someone.
3 minutes till show is over.
Until January 21st. Now, assuming it takes, you know, a month or 6 weeks to appoint someone, well, you know, that depends on who's controlling the Congress or the Senate at the time. You're going to go 5 months with a 8-person Supreme Court, and at best, you're going to have the final 2 months with somebody on there. If you've got close decisions and they start going 4-4, you've lost an entire, you know, almost an entire Supreme Court season.
Session, yeah.
That is irresponsible. And on top of that, if you've got a close election that might have constitutional questions, as did, and it's not crazy because I lived through.
Look at how close 2016
you need 9 people on there.
No, you're right. You're right. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it. We have to go to a break. This is Rob Port sitting in for Jay Thomas. We'll be back and wrap things up right after this. Welcome back. Rob Port in for Jay Thomas, wrapping the show up. I'll be back tomorrow. And Senator Kevin Cramer is going to be on. Obviously, he is supportive of moving ahead with Justice Ginsburg. I wrote my print column already for Wednesday because that's how it works in the news business. You have to write. If you still want to write in print, it's got to be ahead of time. I wrote it, and I feel like I'm arguing this from the perspective of we've got to cool politics down in America. I think Republicans should wait and see. And I think it might even be good for the Trump campaign to have out there saying, hey, if you reelect us, we'll get to fill this vacancy rather than do it now. Maybe that's rolling the dice too much for people, but I'm very much in the camp of boy, we got to ramp a lot of this rhetoric down. That's it for me today, though. Thanks for all the emails. Thanks for all the calls. Thank you most of all for listening, and we'll talk again.